Hello, Andrew Colsky here today, and we are going to be talking with Nick Sireau. And Nick is someone who is putting together an OCD Contact Registry to assist OCD research for new medications and new treatments. So Nick, welcome to the program, and could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and thanks for doing this podcast. So I'm Nick. I have had OCD for over 30 years, actually, for 33 years now, because I started having it from age 17 and I'm now 50. And yeah, it's been a rough ride, as most people with OCD know. It gets sometimes a bit better, sometimes a bit worse, and sometimes catastrophically worse. So yeah, I've had most pure O forms of OCD, not that much in the kind of the contamination ones and all that. And I decided a few years ago to really do something about it, and that's why I set up the charity Orchard OCD.
Fantastic. And I definitely want to talk more about that in a minute. But first, let's understand a little bit more about your background. So you say that you've had OCD since you were about your teens or so, for quite a long time. Um, here I am sitting in the US, and I know you're in the UK, and you and I had an opportunity to talk a little bit before. Can you tell us about OCD treatment in the UK? What's it like?
Yeah, well, actually, at the time I was living in France, it was in 1990 when a thought just popped in my head, and it didn't leave then for 4 years. And at the time, I didn't actually know what it was. There was no internet and all that. I knew something was wrong because I had these things that I called just obsessions. I kind of explained it to my parents and to my girlfriend that I had these obsessions, but no one really knew what was wrong with me. And I didn't tell anybody else. And so I took myself at the time to see a psychologist who I found in the Yellow Pages. And she was utterly useless. She was a psychoanalyst. She took me through 3 years of Freudian psychoanalysis, never gave a name to my disorder and all that. And it was a complete and utter waste of time and actually quite detrimental. It was only about 8, 9 years ago when my brother actually lent me a book about OCD in the late 90s that I realized that that's what I had. And at the time then, I was living in the UK. And so I took myself to see my general practitioner who said, yes, it looks like you do have OCD. And he said, it's going to take a while actually for you to get to see a psychologist on the National Health Service. So I went private and I managed to find a very good CBT practitioner who took me through a year's worth of exposure response prevention, which helped. And the OCD then subsided for a number of years, and it would come back and all that kind of stuff. But basically, every time I tried to access psychological therapy through the National Health System, there was such a wait that I ended up going private each time. I mean, I now live in Cambridge in the UK. I run a local OCD support group, and we actually had our monthly meeting last night. We're affiliated to the charity OCD Action. And some members of the group are waiting 2 years to see a psychologist on the National Health Service here, 2 years. And it's just a disaster, And then we have one member, when she eventually got to see a psychologist, it was a trainee who had no idea about OCD, who told her, I have no idea about OCD and what to do, And then eventually she got to see a psychiatrist who then, I mean, to say it's absurd is just like, who then sent her a letter which was identical to the letter she got from the psychiatrist she'd seen a year before. The guy had copied and pasted it. And eventually she got to see another one, and she had something like 12 assessments with different psychologists and psychiatrists, and is still waiting to see somebody and to get therapy. So to say that the system is broken is an understatement. It is totally broken. My personal experience, so I said I've had a lot of private psychological therapy, some of it good, some of it less good. And it ends up being expensive, so you need really family members who can pay for that. I have seen psychiatrists on the National Health Service, and actually I've been relatively positive there, So when I had a major relapse 7, 8 years ago of my OCD, which really spiraled out of control with suicidal depression, everything, my GP got me to urgently see a psychiatrist there on the NHS, and they put me on a high dose of clomipramine. And that worked really well for my depression, but not at all for my OCD, unfortunately. So my own experience has been mixed, but yeah, mental health in the UK is really in a state of massive disarray. And that is just years and years and years of just lack of funding from the government. You know, it's just
wow.
yeah.
That's that's so sad to hear that people are having to wait such a long time, and then when they finally do see someone, the person isn't trained to help them.
Yeah, I mean, that's my experience from my local support group. You know, they generally really do struggle to access treatments, but sometimes, you know, they do eventually find some people who are very, very good. You know, there are some people out there within the system, within the NHS, within the private system, who really do understand OCD. You know, and you get, you know, some really good specialist centres. There's a specialist centre in London called the Maudsley. And, you know, all my members who've been there really sing its praises. But it's very difficult to access, very difficult to access. But when you do access it, you meet some of the world experts in OCD treatment, you know. So that what we're realizing is that there are pockets of very good care and service. The problem is trying to disseminate this so that there is a wider understanding within the health profession of OCD and how to treat it. That is the real problem.
Absolutely, which is exactly why I do this podcast, for that very exact reason. And you know, it's interesting because in the US, because of the way that our system is set up, you don't have, you know, a 2-year wait to see someone, because you'll either have private insurance or private pay or Medicare or whatever it may be. The challenge that we have, though, is similar to what you're experiencing, which is we have a lot of people trained as mental health counselors, as psychologists, as psychiatrists, and, you know, all this training, but we don't train them about OCD in school. So the only way that you're going to find someone who actually knows how to treat OCD is someone who took it upon themselves to teach themselves and, you know, enroll in different types of courses and things to really learn it. Now, you know, the good news is that those people tend to be very good at what they do because they were interested in learning it and took the time out of their schedule to make it happen. But it is a relatively small community of practitioners who are truly trained to treat OCD. So, you know, just having insurance and going to someone who's a mental health practitioner doesn't mean that they're going to know anything about OCD. And in most cases, because they haven't been trained on it, they're not aware of it. They're not familiar with how to treat. So I get calls. Actually, just a few minutes ago, before we started the podcast, I got a message from another counselor who recognized she had a patient with OCD and doesn't know what to do. So she's, you know, calling me for a consult. So, you know, one of my personal issues has been trying to educate the public and find ways to educate practitioners about OCD. So I've been speaking at conferences, I've been giving trainings. I'm going to be speaking at another conference in November, just training people how to recognize OCD. What is OCD? What type of treatments are available? So there's a lot of similarities, it sounds like, there. But tell me about your experience with learning about OCD treatment. I was asking what you know about where we're headed with OCD treatment, what type of studies and things might be out there that are going on that you know of.
Yeah. So at Orchard OCD, I mean, what we do, the reason that I set it up was to really accelerate research into OCD, because, you know, the existing treatments, the medications, they're not very good, you know. I mean, some people react relatively well to them. We have one of our members of our support group who really swears by her fluoxetine. You know, it hasn't cured her OCD, but it allows her to function. You know, from my point of view, the medications kind of worked for my severe depression, but they did nothing really for my OCD. And it's a very mixed bag, and they come with all kinds of side effects, and they take months to have an effect, and you have to go to very high dose and antipsychotics and the whole works and all that. So what we're trying to do with Orchard is to really accelerate the research into new and better treatments, you know. And so we've got 3 research studies that we're working on. The first one, which I think is very exciting, is psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. There's been a lot of talk about psychedelics over the past few years. You know, I mean, 20 years ago, when the first study was done by the University of Arizona by Francisco Marino on psilocybin for OCD, just a small handful of patients, he had some very good results. But when I spoke to him, you know, a few years ago, he said that the time just wasn't right to take it forwards after that, because no one was interested, because it was the middle of the war on drugs and all that kind of stuff. But things have changed a lot over the past 5 years. And so we are funding a study under a very eminent psychedelic researcher called Professor David Nutt at the University Imperial College in London, and that is on a number of patients. We're about halfway through the study. I think it will probably finish sometime early next year, and that's on what they're calling a sub-psychedelic dose of psilocybin to see whether that has an effect and helps patients. But there's also studies at Yale University, at the University of Arizona. I also believe in Israel and all that. And so hopefully all that data together will be able to make the case for a kind of what we're calling psychedelic assisted therapy, And some of the reports I read, particularly from the Yale study that was published last December, particularly a particular case study, were really positive, But as with all research, you have to wait till the end of the study, look at the data scientifically and see whether you can actually detect anything. So that's the first thing we're looking at. The second one is actually a medical device, transcranial direct current stimulation, which is a relatively small medical device with 2 electrodes that you put on your head, and it provides a little electric current which is imperceptible. And we did that with a professor called Professor Naomi Feinberg, who is one of the leading experts in OCD in the UK, and she runs a highly specialist centre for severe OCD, and she's just an amazing person. And we funded, or we co-funded, a study she did on that, and they published the results, and they actually detected a reduction, a statistically significant reduction in people's OCD, quite rapid within an hour or two, actually. When they used the device, obviously it didn't cure it, but it was a kind of a relief of symptoms, and so now we're looking to raise funds to do a much larger study. Particularly a home-based study, so that people could then actually use this at home, which would be awesome, because at the moment there is no treatment that works within hours, and you can imagine, if you're in the middle of a really bad OCD crisis, you just want something to even relieve the symptoms, even if it doesn't completely take them away, just so you can actually start functioning and have a bit of a break from the constant obsessions and compulsions. So, that was really good, and we were really pleased about that. The third study started. So we're funding Professor John Grant at the University of Chicago, who is studying a drug called tolcapone, which I think is actually a drug that was originally developed, I think, for Parkinson's, and works on dopamine. And he's trying to repurpose the drug for OCD. He's got some preliminary data that's very promising. And so we provided a grant to him to actually do a larger clinical study to see what he can find. So really we will work with anybody who is doing really good, rigorous science. We have a whole scientific advisory board with people from Stanford, people from, Cambridge, everywhere, who really rigorously look at all the proposals. And we will fund basically anybody who is trying to develop new treatments for people with OCD, And then we also recently actually did a study, which is not a clinical study, but we worked with a health economics company in Cambridge in the UK called Costello Medical, and they did some work for us, completely pro bono, so completely for free, where they assessed the cost of OCD in the UK to the society, to the economy, and to the health system. And they found it was around £11 billion a year. So that's around something like $13 to $15 billion a year, that's just huge. That was around something like £15,000 per patient per year and all that. And that is not just the costs of the health system, like the national health system, but it's also, the cost people pay in private healthcare, but also absenteeism, because they have to take time off work, presenteeism when they're at work, but they're not really there. The fact that, being on disability benefits, all that kind of stuff, and then the fact that also the family gets involved and has to take time off when people are really ill, so it's just monumental. And the reason we did that research was because when we do funding applications, when we apply to government funders and all that kind of stuff, we want to explain to them that OCD is devastating on a personal basis, very high suicide rates. I think 1 in 8 patients will attempt suicide. But on an economic basis, which is unfortunately sometimes what is needed to convince governments and all that, it's catastrophic, absolutely catastrophic.
Wow. Well, I don't have any studies or anything to support this statement. However, I can tell you as a practitioner, once I learned about OCD and I really started to understand it deeply, I see, I work with a lot of clients with OCD and anxiety, but I also have other clients. And I think that OCD is actually more prevalent than we realize
Yeah,
because people don't know about it, so they don't diagnose it, and therefore they don't
yeah,
report it.
yeah.
So I think the numbers are higher than we think they are.
I
Um,
think you're absolutely right. And that is kind of the eternal debate, So the more conservative estimates will say around 1 or 2% of the population is OCD. I think it's closer to 3%. And the reason for that is I think that there's a study I found last year. I can't remember who it was what by, but it was in Rwanda. They did a study on mental health in Rwanda. And obviously, they found post-traumatic stress disorder is still very high, from the genocide 30 years ago. But I believe they found that OCD was around 3 to 3.5% of the population, And then a study in Zurich in Switzerland found a similar thing. So from Rwanda to Switzerland, it seems to be around a 3 to 3.5%, And every time I do a talk, every time I speak to people about what we're doing at Orchard, there's always someone, who says, I have OCD, my child's got OCD. It is incredibly prevalent. And I think it is totally underdiagnosed. I think
mhm.
you're totally right. Yeah.
So, that raises a question that I'm curious whether you've seen any research into this or done, been involved in any way. From a genetic perspective, it's very, very, very common that if I have a patient with OCD, I will ask them if their parents or someone close to them had it, and the answer is pretty much always yes. But I don't know that we've actually found a genetic link. Do you have any information about that?
No, I don't think we have yet found a genetic link, but it is clearly inherited, whether it's 40%, 50%, whatever inherited, we don't really know. And I think there's hundreds of genes that have been implicated. I know that the Foundation for OCD Research in the US, I think, is funding some research to really look at the genetics because it's super important. And actually, we discussed this last night at our OCD support group. We kind of discussed how, because we had a new member who turned up, and he was like, his mum has OCD, and he's got OCD. Looks like his sister's got OCD, and then my co-facilitator also was saying how it runs in her family and stuff, And yeah, it's very common, to run in families, and there clearly is a genetic susceptibility because, I mean, it's fundamentally a biological disorder. It's a biological disorder. So if we could really find, and then also I think there's certain mouse models. I think there's the SAPAT3 mouse model where they knock out a certain gene or something, and then the mouse develops certain compulsive behaviors and things. So, if we could identify, it's not going to be a single gene, but if we could really identify the most common genes that have an effect on OCD, that would be a huge step forward.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, so, in order to assist that effort, I know you've put together this registry. And
Mm-hmm.
can you tell us what is the registry? How might someone sign up for the registry? Give us the details on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know if people know exactly what a registry is. Let me just try and find the web address. Orchard, there we go. It's orchardocdregistry.org. That's Orchard, ORCHARD, OCD, and then registry, REGISTRY.org. And the reason we set this up, so it's a contact registry. So it's a website where people go, and it's been developed in partnership with the University of Hertfordshire, where Professor Naomi Feinberg, the OCD specialist, is based, and she has an amazing team there. And so we provided the funding for this, and they developed it. So it's all completely compliant with GDPR in Europe and all that, and all the privacy policies and data compliance and absolutely everything, because it's patient data. So, we're super careful about that. And it's a very simple, actually, registry. So patients go on there and then they log in and register, and they say just a little bit about their OCD, how long they've had it, what treatments they're on and all that. And then they say whether they're interested in participating or not in research studies. And then what we have is another platform where researchers, whether they're academics or clinicians or even from industry, can register their study. And it can be anything from a questionnaire study. It could be a new drug, for instance, the Biohaven study, a troriluzole is on there, or it could be some MRI scans to see what's happening, inside the brain of people with OCD, whatever. And they register it, and then regularly we will send out information about these studies to all the patients who are registered on the registry. And then it's up to the patients to decide whether they want to participate or not. And if they do, they can then contact the study, and then, you know, sign consent forms and then participate, etc. And the reason we set this up is, I've been speaking now to scientists and researchers involved in OCD for many years. And there's two barriers, it seems, to research. One is funding. You know, it's just so difficult to get the funding for research in general, but particularly for OCD. So that's one of the things we provide, as I've explained. But the other thing is actually recruiting participants into their studies. You know, it seems to be particularly difficult, I think, for mental health, but even with mental health, particularly difficult for OCD. And so that's why we thought if we can create this kind of database, this confidential database where patients can actually register their interest, it will then be easier for these researchers to actually recruit patients who are willing to join their studies, you know. And what we're also doing, and what we've just finished, we actually did a survey over the past 9 months, and that closed about a month ago, where we asked OCD patients about what are the barriers preventing them from joining studies, you know, and we're just analyzing the data now. So really, the whole work that we do at Orchard OCD is we are here to try and create a better and an easier environment for scientists to research, understand, and treat OCD, you know. So we're looking at all the barriers that are out there and trying to overcome them to help the whole research community.
Mhm. That's fantastic and really needed. But let me clarify some things because I want to make sure I have this right. So someone with OCD can sign up on the registry, and then you said the scientists can register their projects. So how does the connection get made? Does the patient say, I want to be part of this project? Does the scientist have the ability to reach out to the patient? How does that actually work?
We send the information about the research projects to the patient, and it's then up to the patient to decide whether they want to actually respond or not. Okay, so we don't give any of the details to the researchers and all that, you know. It's entirely up to the patient to decide whether they want to or not.
So
You know,
the
I can
patient
probably
can,
share my screen if you want. I can share my screen, and oh no, you've disabled
wait,
it.
hang on,
And you know,
you can now.
okay, great. So, okay, so this is the website, Orchard OCD Registry. Let me just hide my meeting controls. So you go onto there and then sign up to be a volunteer for the registry. You can see it here. You click on that. It takes you to redcap.hearts. Redcap is the name of the database that is used. Hearts.ac.uk is the University of Hertfordshire. So, you know, a very eminent and registered university in the UK. So you have your volunteer registration form, and you have a volunteer guide there that you can download, the whole privacy statements here and all that. You click on next page, okay, and then it has the volunteer registration form, explaining that University of Hertfordshire the data controllers, which is in line with the government's data regulations, and these are the questions that it will ask: month and year of birth, gender, ethnicity, first part of postcode, your history of OCD, information about current treatments, about past treatments, family history of OCD, which is what we were just discussing about genetics, your preference for research studies, so what studies they're interested in, which ones they're not interested in, the preferred member of contact, and the contact details, you know, for instance, telephone number and email address. And then there's a bit about why we ask for this information, where your data is processed and stored, how we protect your data, how long your data is kept for, blah, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then more information, you know, how you can contact us. There's a data protection officer at the University of Hertfordshire. And then you either agree or you don't. Obviously, if you don't, well, that's it. But if you do agree, you click on yes, you go to the next page. And that's when it starts taking just a little bit of information, you know. Okay. So let me just stop sharing that. I can figure out how to do that. There we go. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Well,
yeah,
thanks.
so the more people join, the better. I mean, at the moment, it's mainly UK, but it's going to go international. I think actually we do have a study on there that is outside the UK and stuff, you know. So, you know, the strength of this whole thing will depend on how many people actually register. It takes just a few minutes, really. It's not asking for much information and stuff, you know. And if people have any questions, there's a few email addresses on there that they can, you know, reach out to us to ask more, you know. So the more people share it and the more people join, the better for OCD research and the better for new treatments.
Right, right. No, that's wonderful. And I'm glad you were able to share your screen and show us that so that we know exactly what it looks like and people know exactly what to expect. It sounds like you've really taken a lot of time to make sure the privacy is, you know, forefront for people.
Yeah, it has to be 100%. It has to be. This is so important and stuff. So people have to be fully confident that it's 100% compliance with everything.
Right, right. Well, this is great information, and certainly it sounds like it's a great way to start matching up some people with studies and get more, uh, get more studies done with a bigger group of people, which is obviously very much needed. The other piece that's needed that I haven't cracked the code on how to do yet is the education piece. When we're educating our practitioners, we just miss the entire OCD issue. And
Mm. Mm.
if we educated them about it, they'd be more ready to understand it, diagnose it, know how to handle it.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, and I think what you're doing is great because, as we all know, there is such a trivialization of OCD within society. That people just think it's a small quirk of personality, and when you do explain, the different types of OCD, and how devastating it can be, a lot of people are just like floored. They really didn't realize. I guess the only ones who do are those who either obviously have OCD or know someone who's got OCD, and then for them, they're in complete agreement. So, but I'm often surprised, even within the medical profession, how much, I mean, as you say, how much lack of knowledge and trivialization, even amongst psychologists and psychiatrists, So yeah, there's a lot of work to do, but I think things are going in the right direction. I really think things are.
yeah, and I think just the internet and the ability to do even
Mm.
small things like this really has helped to provide more information to people who are really looking for it. Because prior to the internet, where would you go? What would there just wasn't access to information.
No, it was impossible. I remember looking in 1990 in my parents' medical encyclopedia, for anything that could help, and obviously I found absolutely nothing. I mean, it was just 2 volumes. That was it. That was it.
Right.
There was no Wikipedia, there was just no Google, nothing. Yeah. So I think things are definitely getting better.
Great, great. Well, I appreciate the fact that you're doing the work on this to make this happen. That's really important. And I appreciate you taking the time to join me on the podcast so that we can spread this information. I will put the link to the study down below the video here so people can go to the link if they want to join and register. Um, and as you said, on the website, if they have additional questions, there's ways for them to contact you, correct?
Yeah, I mean, my email is nick@orchardocd.org. That's NICK at ORCHARD OCD.org. So, people can email me. It's not a problem.
Okay, and I'll put that in the notes below the video as well. So
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
yes, thank you for taking the time, and I appreciate the work you're doing. And let's see if we can't get you some people signed up on the registry.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, have a great day.
Thank you.